Oh, to introduce. A very, very good welcome to everybody to the 37th meeting. Is it the 37th meeting of Soteria, when we shall be rereading, or in some cases reading for the first time, Dennis Wheatley, to see how this writer affects us, returning to him after, in my case at least, a half a century, more than half a century. Is Dennis Wheatley a truly great writer, or is he a dated writer of pot boilers who is justifiably now forgotten? Perhaps we shall discover this by reading him today.
Good, right. Now, can everyone see the...
Yes, very clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is quite... I don't know where it comes from, but so let's see.
Looks like it's been taken out of someone's library, doesn't it?
Right. My old friend Mervyn Barry, in these days I see far too little, but whose companionship, both in good times and bad, has been to me a never failing joy.
By the way, Stead, maybe your microphone isn't quite as well fitted up this time or something. Your voice, I don't know about everybody else, but your voice to me is sort of coming and going a little bit.
Same for me.
Yeah.
I'll move closer. Your author's note, is that better?
Yes, that sounds fine to me. Yeah.
I desire to state that I personally have never assisted at or participated in any ceremony connected with magic, black or white. The literature of occultism is so immense that any conscientious writer can obtain from it abundant material in the background of a romance such as this. In the present case, I have spared no pains to secure accuracy of detail from existing accounts when describing magical rites or formulas for protection against evil. And these have been verified in conversation with certain persons out for that purpose, who are actual practitioners of the art. All the characters and situations in this book are entirely imaginary, but in the inquiry necessary to the writing of it, I found ample evidence that black magic is still practiced in London and other cities at the present day. Should any of my readers incline to a serious study of the subject and thus come into contact with a man or woman of power, I feel that it is only right to urge them most strongly to refrain from being drawn into the practice of the secret art in any way. My own observations have led me to an absolute conviction that to do so would bring them into danger of a very real and concrete nature. Dennis Wheatley. Right. Now, Janine, perhaps you would like to begin.
Could we possibly make this print a little bit larger? Because it seems like it's a little bit blurry. We could just make it
I'm sure I can do that.
Are we starting right from the beginning and just reading the first chapter, or how are you proposing?
See how it goes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Is that good enough?
Yeah, that's good. That's great. Yeah. The incomplete reunion. The Duke of Richelieu and Rex van Ryn had gone into dinner at 8 o'clock, but coffee was not served until after 10. An appetite in keeping with his mighty frame had enabled Van Ryn to do ample justice to each well-chosen course, and as was his custom each time the young American arrived in England, the Duke had produced his finest wines for this, their reunion dinner at his flat. A casual observer might well have considered it a strange friendship, but despite their difference in age and race, appearance and tradition, a real devotion existed between the two. Some few years earlier, Rex's foolhardiness had landed him in a Soviet prison, and the elderly French exile had put aside his peaceful existence as art connoisseur and dilettante to search for him in Russia. Together they had learned the dangerous secret of the forbidden territory and traveled many thousand Verts pursued by the merciless agents of the Ogpu. There had been others, too, in that strange adventure, a young Richard Eaton and the little Princess Marie Lou, whom he had brought out of Russia as his bride. But as Rex accepted a long Hoyo de Monterey from the cedar cabinet which the Duke's man presented to him, his thoughts were not of the Eatons, living now so happily through his thoughts, were not of Eaton, lovely old country home near Kidderminster. He was thinking of that third companion whose subtle brain and shy, nervous courage had proved so great an aid when they were hunted like hares through the length and breadth of Russia. The frail, narrow-shouldered English Jew, Simon Aaron. What could possibly have kept Simon from being with them tonight? Rex was wondering. He had never failed before to make a third at these reunion dinners, and why had the Duke brushed aside his inquiries about him in such an offhanded manner? There was something queer behind de Richelieu's resistance, and Rex had a feeling that for all his host's easy charm and bland, witty conversation, something had gone seriously wrong. He slowly moved some of the Duke's wonderful old brandy into a bowl-shaped glass while he watched the servant preparing to leave the room. Then, as the door closed, he set it down and addressed de Richelieu almost abruptly. Well, I'm thinking it's about time for you to spill the beans. The Duke inhaled the first cloud of fragrant smoke from another of those long Hoyos, which were his special pride, and answered guardedly, "Had you not better tell me, Rex, to what particular beans you refer?" "Simon, of course. For years now, the three of us have dined together on my first night each time I've come across, and you were too mightily casual to be natural when I asked about him before dinner. Why isn't he here?" "Why, indeed, my friend," the Duke repeated, running the tips of his fingers down his lean, handsome face. "I asked him and told him that your ship had docked this morning, but he declined to honor us tonight. Is he ill then?" "No, as far as I know, he's perfectly well. At all events, he was at his office today." "He must have had a date then that he couldn't scrap, or some mighty urgent work. Nothing less could induce him to let us down on one of these occasions. They've become, well, in a way, almost sacred to our friendship. On the contrary, he is at home tonight. He made his apologies, of course, something about resting in a bridge tournament that starts." "Bridge tournament, my foot!" exclaimed Rex angrily. "He'd never let that interfere between us three. Sounds mighty fishy to me. When did you see him last?" "About 3 months ago." "What? But that's incredible. Now look here." Rex thrust the onyx ashtray from in front of him and leaned across the table. "You haven't quarreled, have you?" De Richelieu shook his head. "If you were my age, Rex, and had no children, then met two younger men who gave you their affection and had all the attributes you could wish for in your sons, how would it be possible for you to quarrel with either of them?" "That's so, but 3 months is a whole lot of while for friends who are accustomed to meet 2 or 3 times a week. I just don't get this thing at all, and you're being a sight too reticent about it. Come on now, what do you know? Flip right." The gray eyes, almost piercing brilliance, which gave such character to de Richelieu's face, lit up. "That," he said suddenly, "is just the trouble. I don't know anything." "But you fear that," to use his own phrase, Simon's, "in a muddle, a really nasty muddle, eh? And you're a little hurt that he hasn't brought his worry to you. To whom else should he turn? It's not to one of us, and you were in the States. Richard, maybe, he's an even older friend of Simon's than we are." "No, I spent last weekend at Cardinal's Folly, and neither Richard nor Marie Lou could tell me anything. They haven't seen him since he went down to stay last Christmas and arrived with a dozen crates of toys for Fleur." "How like him!" Rex's gargantuan laugh rang suddenly through the room. I might have known that trunkful I brought over would be small fry if you and Simon had been busy on that child. Well, I can only conclude that poor Simon is in a muddle, as you say, or he would never treat us like this. But what sort of muddle? Rex brought his leg of mutton fist crashing down on the table angrily. I can't think of a thing he wouldn't turn to us. Money, suggested the Duke, is one thing that with his queer sensitive nature, he might not care to discuss with even his closest friends. I doubt it, being that my old man has a wonderful opinion of Simon's financial ability, and he handles a big portion of our interests on this side. I'm pretty sure we'd be wise to it if he'd burned his fingers on the market. It sounds as if he's gone bats about some woman to me. Yeah, I can't, it's a little bit blurry. Miss Richelieu's face was lit by his faintly cynical smile for a moment. No, he said slowly, a man in love turns naturally to his friends for congratulation or sympathy as his fortune with the woman proves good or ill. It can't be that. For a little, the two friends sat staring at each other in silence across the low jade bowl with its trailing sprays of orchids. Rex, giant-shouldered, virile and powerful, his ugly, attractive, humorous young face clouded with anxiety. The Duke, a slim, delicate-looking man, someone about middle height with slender, fragile hands and graying hair, but with no trace of weakness in his fine, distinguished face. His aquiline nose, broad forehead, and gray devil's eyebrows might well have replaced those of the cavalier in the Van Dyck that gazed down from the opposite wall. Instead of the conventional black, he wore a claret-colored vicuna smoking suit with silk lapels and braided fastenings. This touch of color increased his likeness to the portrait. He broke the silence suddenly.
Father Frank, perhaps you'd like to carry on?
Okay. Have you by any chance ever heard of a Mr. Mokata, Rex? Nope. Who is he anyway? A new friend of Simon's who has been staying with him this last few months. What? At his club? No. Simon no longer lives at his club. I thought you knew. He bought a house last February, a big, rambling old place tucked away at the end of a cul-de-sac off one of those quiet residential streets in St. John's Wood. Why, that's right out past Regent's Park, isn't it? What's he want with a place out there when there are a number of nice little houses to let here in Mayfair? Another mystery, my friend. The Duke's thin lips creased into a smile. He said he wanted a garden, that's all I can tell you. Simon, a garden, Rex chuckled. That's a good story, I'd say. Simon doesn't know a geranium for a fuchsia. His botany is limited to an outsized florist bill for bunching his women friends from shops. And why should a bachelor like Simon start running a big house at all? Perhaps Mr. Mokata can tell you, murmured Dr. Richelieu mildly, or the queer servant that he has imported. Have you ever seen that bird? Mokata, I mean. Yes. I called one evening about 6 weeks ago. Simon was out, so Mokata received me. And what did you make of him? I disliked him intensely. He's a pot-bellied, bald-headed person of about 60, with large, protuberant, fishy eyes, limp hands, and a most attractive lisp. He reminded me of a large white slug. What about the servant? What about the servant that you mentioned? I only saw him for a moment when he crossed the hall. May remind me in a most unpleasant way of a bogeyman with whom I used to be friendly in my infancy. Why? Is he black? Yes, a Mulgussie, I should think. Rex frowned. Now, what in heck is that? A native of Madagascar. They're all a curious people, half Negro and half Polynesian. This grey brute stands about 6'8", and the one glimpse I had of his eyes made me want to shoot him on sight. is a bad black, if ever I saw one, and I've traveled, as you know, in my time. Do you know any more about these people? Asked Rex grimly. Not a thing. Well, I'm not given to worry, but I've heard quite enough to get me scared for Simon. He's in some jam, or he'd never be housing people like that. The Duke lently laid the long blue-grey ash of a cigar in the onyx ashtray. There is not a doubt, he says slowly, that Simon is involved in some very queer business, and I've been stifling my anxiety until your arrival. You see, I wanted to hear your views before taking the very exceptional step of, yes, butting in is the expression, of the private affairs of even so intimate a friend. The question is now, what are we to do? Rex thrust back his chair and drew himself up to his full magnificent height. We're going up to that house to have a little heart-to-heart talk with Simon, right now. I'm glad, Dr. Chalet said quietly. You feel like that because I ordered a car for 10:30. Shall we go?
Yeah, do you want to carry on for the next page?
Okay, yeah, you can. So, the curious guest of Mr. Simon Iron. As Dr. Richelot's Hispano drew up at the dead end of a dark cul-de-sac in St. John's Wood, Rex slipped out of the car and looked about him. They were shut in by the high walls of a neighboring garden, and above a black expanse of brick in which a single narrow door was visible, the upper stories of Simon's house showed vague and mysterious among whispering trees. Ah, he explained with a little shudder, and a few drops splashed upon his face from the dark branches overhead. What a dismal hall! We might be in a graveyard. The Duke pressed the bell, and turning up the sable collar of his coat against a slight drizzle, which made the April chill and friendless, stepped back to get a better view of the premises. Hello, Simon's got an observatory here, he remarked. I didn't notice that in my previous visit. So he has. Rex followed Dr. Richelot's glance to a dome that crowned the house, but at that moment the electric globe suddenly flared into life about their heads, and the door in the wall swung open, disclosing a sallow face and manservant in dark livery. Mr. Simon Aaron, inquired Dr. Richelot, though the man was already motioning them to enter. So they followed him up a short covered path, and the door in the wall clanged to behind him. The vestibule of the house was dimly lit, but Rex, who never wore a coat or hat in the evening, noticed the two sets of our door apparently lay nearly folded on a long console table, and the silent footman relieved Dr. Richelot with wraps. Evidently, friend Simon had other visitors. Maybe Mr. Ranner is in conference and won't want to be disturbed, he said to a sallow-faced servant with a sudden feeling of guilt at their intrusion. Perhaps, after all, the fear of Simon was quite groundless, and his neglect only due to a prolonged period of intense activity on the markets. But the man only bowed and led them across the hall.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Here.
Sorry?
Thanks, Father Frank. You'd continue. Yeah, perhaps Hewitt, you would continue. Thanks, Father Frank.
The fellows are mute, whispered the Duke. Deaf and dumb, I'm certain. As he spoke, the servant flung open a couple of large double doors and stood waiting for them to enter. A long, narrow room, opening into a wide salon, stretched before them. Both were decorated in the lavish magnificence of the Louis XVIII period, but for the moment the dazzling brilliance of the lighting prevented them taking in the details of the parquet floors, the crystal mirrors, the gilded furniture, and beautifully wrought tapestries. Rex was the first to recover, and with a quick intake of breath, he clutched de Richelieu's arm. By Jove, she's here, he muttered almost inaudibly, his eyes riveted on a tall, graceful girl who stood some yards away at the entrance of the salon, talking to Simon. 3 times in the last 18 months he had chanced on that strange, wise, beautiful face, with the deep eyes beneath heavy lids that seemed so full of secrets and gave the lovely face a curiously ageless look, so that despite her apparent youth, she was as old as, yes, as old as sin, Rex caught himself thinking. He had seen her first in a restaurant in Budapest. Months later, again in a traffic jam, when his car was wedged beside hers in New York, and then, strangely enough, riding along a road with 3 men in the country 10 miles outside Buenos Aires. How extraordinary that he should find her here, and what luck! He smiled quickly at the thought that Simon could not fail to introduce him. De Richelieu's glance was riveted upon their friend. With an abrupt movement, Simon turned towards them. For a second, he seemed completely at a loss. His full, sensual mouth hung open to twice its normal extent, and his receding jaw almost disappeared behind his white tie, while his dark eyes were filled with amazement and something suspiciously like fear. But he recovered almost instantly, and his old smile flashed out as he came forward to greet them. My dear Simon, the Duke's voice was a silken purr. How can we apologize for breaking in on you like this? Sure, we hadn't a notion you were throwing a party, boomed Rex, his glance following the girl who had moved off to join another woman and 3 men who were talking together in the inner room. But I'm delighted, murmured Simon genially. Delighted to see you both. Only got a few friends. Meeting of a little society I belong to. That's all. Then we wouldn't dream of interrupting you, could we, Rex? De Richelieu demurred with well-assured innocence. Why, certainly not. And we wouldn't even have come in if that servant of yours hadn't taken us for some other folks you're expecting. But despite their apparent unwillingness to intrude, neither of the 2 made any gesture of withdrawal, and mentally, de Richelieu gave Simon full marks for the way in which he accepted their obviously unwelcome presence. I'm most terribly sorry about dinner tonight, he was proclaiming earnestly. Meant to rest for my bridge. I simply have to these days to be any good. Even forgot till 6 o'clock that I had these people coming. How fortunate for you, Simon, that your larder is so well stocked. The Duke could not resist the gentle deed, as his glance fell on a long buffet spread with a collation which would have rivaled the cold table in any great hotel. I phoned Ferraro, parried Simon glibly. The Berkeley never lets me down. Would have asked you to drop in, but with this meeting I was sure I felt you'd be bored. Bored? Not a bit, but we are keeping you from your other guests. With an airy gesture, de Richelieu waved his hand in the direction of the inner room. Sure, Rex heartily, as he laid a large hand on Simon's arm and gently propelled him towards the salon. Don't you worry about us, we'll just take a glass of wine off you and fade away. His eyes were fixed again on the pale oval face of the girl. Simon's glance flickered swiftly towards the Duke, who ignored with a guileless smile his obvious reluctance for them to meet his other friends, and noted with amusement that he avoided any proper introduction. Two very old friends of mine, he said with his little nervous cough, as he interchanged a swift look with a fleshy, moon-faced man whom de Richelieu knew to be Makata. Well, well, how nice. The bald man lisped with unsmiling eyes. It is a pleasure always to welcome any friends of Simon's. De Richelieu gave him a frigid bow and thought of reminding him coldly that Simon's welcome was sufficient in his own house, but for the moment it was policy to hide his antagonism. So he replied politely that Makata was most kind. Then, with the ease which characterized all his movements, he turned his attention to an elderly lady who was seated nearby. She was a woman of advanced age but fine presence, richly dressed and almost weighed down with heavy jewelry. Between her fingers she held the stub of a fat cigar, at which she was puffing vigorously. Madame, the Duke drew a case containing the long hoyos from his pocket and bent towards her. Your cigar is almost finished. Permit me to offer you one of mine. He regarded him for a moment with piercingly bright eyes, then stretched out a fat, beringed hand. Thank you, monsieur. I see you are a connoisseur. With her beaked parrot nose, she sniffed at the cigar appreciatively. But I have not seen you at any other meetings. What is your name? De Richelieu, madame. And yours? Ah, de Richelieu. A maestro indeed, she nodded heavily. Je suis Madame Durfay. You will have heard of me. But certainly, the Duke bowed again. Do you think we shall have a good meeting tonight? If the sky clears, we shall learn much, murmured the old lady cryptically. Ooh, thought the Duke. We're about to make use of Simon's observatory, it seemed. Good, let us learn more. But before he could pump the elderly Frenchwoman further, Simon deftly interrupted the conversation and drew him away.
Thanks, Hugh. Maybe Michael, you would like to continue.
Okay, so you have taken up the study of the stars, my friend, remarked the Duke as his host led him to the buffet. Oh, yes, find astronomy very interesting, you know. Have some caviar. Simon's eyes flickered anxiously towards Rex, who was deeply in conversation with the girl. As he admired her burnished hair and slumberous eyes, for a moment the Duke was reminded of a Botticelli painting. She had, he thought, that angel look with nothing Christian in it peculiar to women born out of their time, the golden virgin to the outward eye, whose veins were filled with unlit fire. A rare Cinquecento type who should have lived in the Italy of the Borgias. Then he turned again to Simon. It was because of the observatory, then, that you acquired this house, I suppose. Yes, you must come up one night and we'll watch a few stars together. Something of the old warmth had crept into Simon's tone, and he was obviously in earnest as he offered the invitation, for the Duke was not deceived into believing that he was welcomed on the present occasion. Thank you, I should enjoy that, he said promptly, while over Simon's shoulder he studied the other two men who made up the party. One, a tall, fair fellow, stood talking to Mokata, his thin flaxen hair brushed flatly back, and whose queer, light eyes proclaimed him an albino. The other, a stout man dressed in green plaid and ginger kilt, was walking softly up and down with his hands clasped behind his back, muttering to himself inaudibly. His wild flowing white hair and curious costume suggested an Irish bard. Altogether a most unprepossessing lot, thought the Duke, and his opinion was not improved by three new arrivals. A grave-faced Chinaman, wearing the robes of a Mandarin, whose slit eyes betrayed a cold, merciless nature, a Eurasian with only one arm, the left, and a tall, thin woman with a scraggy throat and beetling eyebrows which met across the bridge of her nose. Mokata received them as though he were the host, but as the tall woman bore down on Simon, he promptly left the Duke, who guessed that the move was to get out of earshot. However, the lady's greetings in a high-pitched Middle Western accent came clearly to him. Wow, Simon, all excitement about what we'll learn tonight? It should help a heap, this being your natal conjunction. Ha, ha, said de Richelieu to himself. Now I begin to understand a little, and I like this party even less. Then, with the idea of trying to verify his surmise, he turned towards the one-armed Eurasian. But Simon, apparently guessing his intention, quickly excused himself to the American woman and cut off the Duke's advance. So, my young friend, thought de Richelieu, you mean to prevent me from obtaining any further information about this strange gathering, do you? All right, I'll twist your tale a little. And he remarked sweetly, did you say that you were interested in astronomy or astrology, Simon? There is a distinct difference, you know. Oh, astronomy, of course, Simon ran a finger down his long beak-like nose. It is nice to see you again. Have some more champagne. Thank you, no, later perhaps. The Duke smothered a smile as he caught Mokata, who had overheard him, exchange a quick look with Simon. Wish this were an ordinary meeting, Simon said, a moment later with his uneasy frown. Then I'd ask you to stay, but we're going through the Society's annual balance sheet tonight, and you and Rex, not being members, you know. Quite, my dear fellow, of course, de Richelieu agreed. Amiably, while to himself he thought, that's a nasty fence young Slyboots has put up to me, but I'll be damned if I go before I find out for certain what I came for. Then he added in a cheerful whisper, I should have gone before, but Rex seemed so interested in the young woman in green. I want to give him as long as possible. My dear chap, Simon protested, I feel horribly embarrassed at having to ask you to go at all. A fat, oily-looking Babu in a salmon pink turban and gown had just arrived and was shaking hands with Mokata. Behind him came a red-faced Teuton who suffered the deformity of a hare-lip. Simon stepped quickly forward as the two advanced, but de Richelieu once more caught the first words which were snuffed out by the hare-lipped man. Bel Abraham, wie geht es? Then there came the fulsome chuckle of the fleshly Indian. You must not call him that. It is unlucky to do so before the great night. The devil it is, muttered the Duke to himself, but Simon had left the other two with almost indecent haste in order to rejoin him. So he said with a smile, I gather you are about to execute deed poll, my friend. Eh? Simon exclaimed with a slight start. To change your name, de Richelieu supplemented. Nair. He shook his head rapidly as he uttered the curious negative that he often used. It came of his saying, no, without troubling to close his lips of his full mouth. Nair, that's only a sort of joke we have between us, a sort of initiation ceremony. I'm not a full member yet. I see, then, that you have ceremonies in your astronomical society. How interesting. As he spoke, de Richelieu, out of the corner of his eye, saw Mokata make a quick sign to Simon and then glance at the ormolu clock on the mantelpiece. So to save his host the awkwardness of having actually to request his departure, he exclaimed, Dear me, 11:20. I had no idea it was so late. I must drag Rex away from that lovely lady after all, I fear. Well, if you must go, Simon looked embarrassed and worried, but catching Mokata's eye again, he promptly led the way over to his other unwelcome guest. Rex gave a happy grin as they came up. This is marvelous, Simon. I've been getting glimpses of this lady in different continents these 2 years past, and she seems to recall having seen me too. It's just great that we should become acquainted at last through you. Then he smiled quickly at the girl. May I present my friend de Richelieu? Duke, this is Miss Tanith. De Richelieu bent over her long, almost transparent hand and raised it to his lips. How unfortunate I am, he said with old-fashioned gallantry, to be presented to you only in time to say goodbye, and perhaps gain your displeasure by taking your new friend with me as well. But she regarded him steadily out of her large, clear, amber eyes. Surely you do not depart before the ceremony. I fear we must. We are not members of your circle, you see, only old friends of Simon's. A strange look of annoyance and uncertainty crept into her glance, and the Duke guessed that she was searching her mind for any indiscretion she might have committed in her conversation with Rex. Then she shrugged lightly, and with a brief inclination of the head, which dismissed them both, turned coldly away. The Duke took Simon's arm affectionately as the three friends left the salon. I wondered, he said persuasively, if you could spare me just 2 minutes before we go. No more, I promise you. Rather, of course, Simon seemed now to have regained his old joviality. I'll never forgive myself for missing your dinner tonight, this wretched meeting, and I've seen nothing of you for weeks. Now Rex is over, we must throw a party together. We will, de Richelieu agreed heartily. But listen, is not Mars in conjunction with Venus tonight? There, Simon replied promptly. With Saturn, that's what they've all come to see. Ah, Saturn, my astronomy is so rusty, but I saw some mention of it in the paper yesterday, and at one time I was a keen student of the stars. Would it be asking too much, my dear fellow, to have just one peep at it through your telescope? We should hardly delay your meeting for 5 minutes. Simon's hesitation was barely perceptible before he nodded his bird-like head with vigorous assent. That's all right. They haven't all arrived yet. Let's go up. Then, with his hands thrust deep in his trouser pockets of his exceedingly well-cut dress suit, he led them hurriedly through the hall and up 3 flights of stairs. De Richelieu followed more slowly. Stairs were the one thing which ruffled his otherwise equable temper, and he had no desire to lose it now. By the time he arrived in the lofty chamber with Rex behind him, Simon had all the lights switched on. Well, you've certainly gone in for it properly, Rex remarked, as he surveyed the powerful telescope slanting to the roof and a whole arsenal of sextants, spheres, and other astrological impedimenta ranged about the room. It's rather an exact science, you see, Simon volunteered. Quite, agreed the Duke briefly, but I wonder a little that you should consider charts of the macrocosm necessary to your studies. Oh, those, Simon shrugged his narrow shoulders as he glanced round the walls. They're only for fun, relics of the alchemistic nonsense of the Middle Ages, but quite suitable for decoration. How clever of you to carry out your scheme of decoration on the floor as well. The Duke was thoughtfully regarding a 5-pointed star enclosed within 2 circles between which numerous mystic characters in Greek and Hebrew had been carefully drawn. Yes, good idea, wasn't it? Simon tittered into his hand. It was the familiar gesture which both his friends knew so well, yet somehow the chuckle had not quite its usual ring. The silence that followed was a little awkward, and in it, all 3 plainly heard a muffled, scratching noise that seemed to come from a large wicker basket placed against the wall. You've got mice here, Simon said, Rex casually, but de Richelieu had stiffened where he stood. Then, before Simon could bar his way, he leapt towards the hamper and ripped open the lid. Stop that, cried Simon angrily, and dashing forward, he forced it shut again, but too late, for within the basket the Duke had seen 2 living pinioned fowls, a black cock and a white hen. With a sudden access of bitter fury, he turned on Simon, and seizing him by a silk label, shook him as a terrier shakes a rat. You fool, he thundered. I see you dead than monkeying with, I'd rather see you dead than monkeying with black magic.
Thank you very much, Michael. Could the other Michael, could you take up the story?
Take your hands off me, Simon gasped. His dark eyes blazed in a face that had gone deathly white, and only a superhuman effort enabled him to keep his clenched fist pressed to his sides. In another second, he would have hit the Duke, but Rex, a head taller than either of them, laid a mighty hand on the shoulder of each and forced them apart. Have a heart now, just what is all this? His quiet, familiar voice with its faint American intonation sobered the others immediately, and de Richelieu, swinging on his heels, strode to the other side of the observatory, where he stood for a moment, with his back towards them, regaining control of his emotions. Simon, panting a little, gave a quick, nervous wriggle of his bird-like head and smoothed out the lapels of his evening coat. Now I'll tell you, he said jerkily, I never asked either of you to come here tonight, and even my oldest friends have no right to butt in on my private affairs. I think you'd better go. The Duke turned, passing one hand over his greying hair. All trace of his astonished outburst had disappeared, and he was once more the handsome, distinguished figure that they knew so well. I'm sorry, Simon, he said gravely, but I felt as a father might who sees his child trying to pick live coals out of the fire. I'm not a child, muttered Simon sullenly. No, but I could not have more affection for you if you were actually my son, and it is useless now to deny that you are playing the most dangerous game which has ever been known to mankind throughout the ages. Oh, come. A quick smile spread over Rex's ugly, attractive face. That's a gross exaggeration. What's the harm if Simon wants to try out a few old parlour games? Parlour games? De Richelieu took him up sharply. My dear Rex, I fear your prowess in aeroplanes and racing cars hardly qualifies you to judge the soul-destroying powers of these ancient cults. Thanks, I'm not quite a half-wit, and plenty of spiritualistic seances take place in the States, but I've never heard of anyone as sane as Simon going bats because of them yet. Simon nodded his narrow head slowly up and down. Of course, Rex is right, and you're only making a mountain out of a molehill. As you like, de Richelieu shrugged. In that case, will you permit us to stay and participate in your operations tonight? No, I'm sorry, but you're not members of our circle. No matter. We have already met most of your friends downstairs. Surely they will not object to our presence on just this one occasion. No. Simon shook his head again. Our number is made up. I see. You are already 13, is that it? Now listen, Simon. The Duke laid his hands gently on the young Jew's shoulders. One of the reasons why my friendship with Rex and yourself has developed into such a splendid intimacy is because I have always refrained from stressing my age and greater experience. But tonight I break the rule. My conscious life, since we both left our schools, has been nearly 3 times as long as yours. And in addition, although I have never told you of it, I made a deep study of these esoteric doctrines years ago when I lived in the East. I beg of you, as I have never begged for anything in my life before, that you should give up whatever quest you are engaged upon and leave this house with us immediately. For a moment, Simon seemed to waver. All his faith in de Richelieu's judgment, knowledge, and love for him urged him to agree. But at that moment, Mokata's musical, lisping voice cut in upon the silence, calling from the landing just below. Simon, the others have come. It is time. Coming, called Simon. Then he looked at the 2 friends with whom he had risked his life in the forbidden territory. I can't, he said with an effort. You heard. It's too late to back out now. Then let us remain, please, begged the Duke. No, I'm sorry. A new firmness had crept into Simon's tone. But I must ask you to go now. Very well. De Richelieu stepped forward as though to shake hands. Then, with almost incredible swiftness, his arm flew back, and next second his fist caught Simon a smashing blow full beneath the jaw. The action was so sudden, so unexpected, that Simon was caught completely off his guard. For a fraction of time he was lifted from his feet, then he crashed senseless on his back and slid spread-eagled across the polished floor. You gone crazy? Ejaculated Rex. No, we've got to get him out of here. Save him from himself. Don't argue, quick. Already de Richelieu was kneeling by the crumpled body of his friend. Rex needed no further urging. He had been in too many tight corners with the Duke, to doubt the wisdom of his decision, however strange his actions might appear. In one quick heave, he dragged Simon's limp form across his shoulders and started for the stairs. Steady, ordered the Duke. I'll go first and tackle anyone who tries to stop us. You get into the car. Understood? What if they raise the house? You'll never be able to tackle the whole bunch on your own. In that case, drop him. I'll get him out somehow while you protect my rear. Come on. With de Richelieu leading, they crept down the first flight of stairs. On the landing, he paused and peered cautiously over the banisters. No sound came from below. Rex, he whispered. Yep. If that black servant I told you of appears, for God's sake, don't look at his eyes. Watch his hands and hit him in the belly. Okay. A moment later, they were down the second flight. The hall was empty, and only a vague murmur of conversation came to them from behind the double doors they left that led to the salon. Quick, urged the Duke. MacArthur may come out to look for him any moment. Right. Rex, bent double full beneath his burden, plunged down the last stairs, and de Richelieu was already halfway across the hall when the dumb servant suddenly appeared from the vestibule. For a second he stood there, his sallow face a mask of blank surprise. Then, sidestepping the Duke with the agility of a rugby forward, he lowered his bullet head and charged Rex with silent animal ferocity. You, snapped the Richelieu, for although the man had dodged with lightning speed, he had caught his wrist in passing, then flinging his whole weight upon it as he turned, he jerked the fellow clean off his feet and sent him spinning head foremost against the wall. As his head hit the panelling, the mute gave an uncouth grunt and rolled over on the floor, but he staggered up again and dashed towards the salon. Rex and the Duke were already pounding down the tile path, and in another second they had flung themselves into the lane through the entrance in the garden wall. Thank God, gasped the Duke as he wrenched open the door of the Hispano. I believe that hellish crew would have killed us rather than let us get Simon out of there alive. Well, I suppose you do know what you're at, Rex muttered as he propped Simon up on the back seat of the car, but I'm not certain you're safe to be with. Home, ordered the de Richelieu to the footman, who was hiding his astonishment at their sudden exit by hastily tucking the rug over their knees. Then he smiled at Rex a trifle grimly. I suppose I do seem a little mad to you, but you can't possibly be expected to appreciate what a horribly serious business this is. I'll explain later.
Thanks, Michael. I'll continue for a bit. In a few moments, they had left the gloom of the quiet streets behind and were once more running through well-lit ways towards Mayfair. But Simon was still unconscious when they pulled up in Curzon Street before Errol House. I'll take him, volunteered Rex. The less the servants have to do with this, the better. And picking up Simon in his strong arms as though he'd been a baby, carried him straight upstairs to the first floor where de Richelieu's flat was situated. Put him in the library, said the Duke, who had paused to murmur something of sudden illness to the porter when he arrived on the landing a moment later. I'll get something to bring him round to the bathroom. Rex nodded gently and carried Simon into that room in the Curzon Street flat, which was so memorable for those who had been privileged to visit it, not so much on account of its size and decorations, but for the unique collection of rare and beautiful objects which it contained. A Tibetan Buddha seated upon the lotus, bronze figurines from ancient Greece, beautifully chased rapiers of Toledo steel, and Moorish pistols inlaid with turquoise and gold, icons from Holy Russia set with semi-precious stones, and curiously carved iron from the east. As Rex laid Simon upon the wide sofa, he glanced around him with an interest unappeased by 100 visits. The walls lined shoulder high with beautifully bound books and lovely old colour prints, interspersed with priceless historical documents and maps which hung above them. De Richelieu, when he joined him, produced a small crystal bottle which he held beneath Simon's beak-like nose. No good trying to talk to him tonight, Peter. But I want to bring him round sufficiently to put him to sleep again. Rex grunted. That sounds like double Dutch to me. No, I mean to fight these devils with their own weapons, as you will see. Simon groaned a little, and as his eye flickered open, the Duke took a small round mirror from his pocket. Simon, he said softly, moving the lamp mirror, look upward at my hand. As he spoke, held the mirror about 18 inches from Simon's forehead, at the level of his eyes, caught and reflected the light of the lamp onto his lids. Hold it lower, suggested Rex. He'll strain his eyes, turning them upward like that. Quiet, said the Duke sharply. Simon, look up and listen to me. You have been hurt and have a troubled mind, but your friends are with you and you have no need to worry anymore. Simon opened his eyes again and turned them upward to the mirror. They remained fixed. I'm going to send you to sleep, Simon. De Richelieu went on softly. You need rest. You will awake free from pain. In a moment, your eyes will close and then your head will feel better. For another half minute, he held the mirror steadily, reflecting the light upon Simon's retina. Then he placed the second fingers of his free hand upon the glass with his palm turned out and made a slow pass from it towards the staring eyes, which closed at once before he touched them. You will sleep, he continued quietly, and you will not wake until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Directly you awake, you will come straight to me, either here or in my bedroom, and you will speak to no one, nor will you open any letter or message which may be brought to you. See. De Richelieu paused for a moment, put down the mirror, and lifted one of Simon's arms until it's straight above his head. When he released it, the arm did not drop, but remained stiff and rigid in the air. Most satisfactory, he murmured cheerfully to Rex. He is in the second stage of hypnosis already and will do exactly what he was told. The induction was amazingly easy, but of course his half-conscious state simplified it a lot. Rex shook his head in disapproval. I don't like to see you monkey with him like this. I wouldn't allow it if it was anyone but you. A prejudice based upon lack of understanding, my friend. Hypnotism in proper hands is the greatest healing power in the world. With a quick shrug, the Duke moved over to his desk and, unlocking one of the lower drawers, got something from it, turned to Simon and addressed him in the same low voice. Open your eyes now and sit up. Simon obeyed at once, and Rex was surprised to see that he looked quite wide awake and normal. Only a certain blankness about the face betrayed his abnormal state, and he displayed no aversion as de Richelieu extended the thing he had taken from the drawer. It was a small golden swastika set with precious stones and threaded on a silken ribbon. Simon Aaron, he spoke again. With this symbol, I'm about to place you under the protection of the power of light. No being, force of earth, of air, of fire, or water can harm you while you wear it. With quick fingers, he knotted the talisman round Simon's neck and went on. Now you will go to the spare room. Ring for my Max and tell him that you are staying here tonight. He will provide you with everything you need, and if your throat is parched from your recent coma, ask him for any soft drink you wish, but no alcohol, remember. Peace be upon you and about you. Now go. Simon stood up at once and looked from one to the other of them. Good night, cheerfully, with his quick, natural smile. See you both in the morning. He promptly walked out of the room. He's not really asleep, is he? Asked Rex, looking a little scared. Certainly, but he will remember everything that has taken place tomorrow because he's not in the deep somnambulistic state where I could order him to forget. To achieve that usually takes a little practice with a new. Then he'll be pretty livid, I'll promise you. Fancy having a swastika around the neck of a professing Jew. My dear Rex, do try and broaden your outlook a little. The swastika is the this symbol of wisdom and right thinking in the world. It has been used by every race and in every country at one or other. You might just as well regard the cross as purely Christian when we all know it was venerated in early Egypt, thousands of years before the birth of Christ. The Nazis have only adopted swastika because it is supposed to be of Aryan origin, and part of their program aims at welding together a large section of the Aryan race. The vast majority of them have no conception of its significance, and even if they bring discredit upon it, as the Spanish Inquisition did upon the cross, that could have no effect upon its true meaning. Yes, I get that, though I doubt that if it'll make any difference to Simon's resentment when he finds it round his neck tomorrow. Still, that's a minor point. What worries me is this whole box of tricks this evening. I've got the feeling you ought to be locked up as downright insane unless it's me. De Richelieu smiled. A strange business to be happening in modern London, isn't it? But let's mix a drink and talk it over quietly. Janine, would you resume? Hello?
Right. Strange. Why, if it were true, it would be utterly fantastic. But it's not. All this hoo-ha about black magic and talking hocus pocus while you hang silly charms around Simon's neck is utter bunk, is it? The Duke smiled again as he tipped a lump of ice into Rex's glass and handed it to him. Well, let's hear your explanation of Simon's queer behavior. I suppose you do consider it queer, by the way. Of course, but nothing as queer as you're trying to make out. As I see it, Simon's taken up spiritualism or something of the kind, and plenty of normal, earnest people believe in that. But you know what he is when he gets keen on a thing. Everything else goes to the wall, and that's why he has neglected you a bit. Then this evening he was probably sick as a mud to miss our dinner, but he had a seance all fixed that he couldn't shelve at the last moment. We butt in on his party, and naturally doesn't want to care to admit what he's up to, entertaining all those queer, odd-looking women and men. So he spins a yarn about it being an astronomical society. So you, who've read a slight too many books and seem to have stored up all the old wives' tales your nurse told you in your cradle, get a bee in your bonnet and slog the poor mutt under the jaw. Dr. Rochelle noted, I can hardly expect you to see it any other way at the moment, but let's start at the beginning. Do you agree that after knocking him out, I called in to play a supernormal power in order to send him cheerfully off to bed without a single protest? Yes, even doctors admit hypnotic influence now, and Simon would never have stood for you trying that swastika under his chin, tying that swastika under his chin if he'd been conscious. Good. Then at least we're at least one on the fact that certain forces can be called into play, which the average person does not understand. Now, if instead of practicing that comparatively simple exercise in front of you, I had done it before ignorant natives who had never heard of hypnotism, they would term it magic, would they not? Sure. Then to go a step further, if by great exertion of the same power, I levitated, that is to say, lifted myself to a height of several inches from the floor, you might not use the word magic, but you would class that feat in the same category as that ignorant native would have placed the easier one, because it is something of which you have always thought impossible. That's true. Well, I'm not sufficient of an adept to perform that feat, but will you accept my assurances that I've seen it done, not once, but a number of times? If you say so. But from all I've heard of such things, the fellows you saw didn't leave the ground at all. It's just mass hypnotism exercised upon the whole audience, like the rope trick. As you wish, but that explanation does not rob me of my point. If you admit that I can tap an unknown power to make Simon obey my will, and that an Eastern mystic can tap that power to a far greater extent of making 100 people's eyes deceive them into believing that he is standing on thin air, you admit that there is power and that it can be tapped in greater degrees according to the knowledge and proficiency of the man who uses it. Yes, within limits. Why within limits? You apparently consider levitation impossible, but you wouldn't have considered wireless impossible if you had been living 50 years ago and somebody had endeavored to convince you of it. Maybe. Rex sat forward suddenly. But I don't get what you're driving at. Hypnotism is only a demonstration of the power of the human will. Ah, there you have it. The will to good and the will to evil. That's the whole matter in a nutshell. The human will is like a wireless set, and properly adjusted, trained that it is, it can tune in with the invisible, which is all about us. The invisible influence. I've certainly heard that phrase somewhere before, no doubt. A very eminent mental specialist who holds a high position in our asylums wrote a book with that title, and I have not yet asked you to believe 1/10 of what he vouches for. And I wonder why they haven't locked him up. Rex, de Richelieu smiled a little sadly. Try and open your mind, my friend. Do you believe in the miracles performed by Jesus Christ? Yes. And of his disciples and certain of his saints? Sure, but they had some special power granted to them from on high. Exactly, some special power. But I suppose you would deny that Gautama Buddha and his disciples performed miracles of a similar nature? Not at all. Most people agree now that Buddha was a sort of Indian Christ, a holy man, and no doubt that he had some sort of power granted to him too. The Duke sat back with a heavy sigh. At last, my friend, we seem to be getting somewhere. If you admit that miracles, as you call them, although you object to the word magic, have been performed by two men living in different countries, hundreds of years apart, through their holiness, you cannot reasonably deny that other mystics have also performed similar acts in many portions of the globe, and therefore that there is a power existing outside of us, which is not peculiar to any religion, but can be listed if one can get into communication with it. Well, I'm sorry, utilized if one can get into communication with it. Rex laughed. That's so, I can't deny it. Thank God. Let's mix ourselves another drink, shall we? I need it. Don't move, I'll fix it. Rex good-naturedly scrambled to his feet. All the same, he added slowly, it doesn't follow that because a number of good men have been granted supernatural powers, that there is anything in black magic. Then you do not believe in witchcraft? Of course not. Nobody does in these days. Really? How long do you think it is since the last trial for witchcraft took place? I'll say it was all of 150 years ago. No, it was in January 1926 at Melun near Paris. Oh, you're fooling, Rex exclaimed angrily. I'm not, de Richelieu assured him solemnly. The records of the court will prove my statement. So you see, you are hardly accurate when you say that nobody believes in witchcraft in these days. And many, many thousands still believe in a personal devil. Yes, simple folk maybe, but not educated people. Possibly not. Yet every thinking man must admit that there is still such a thing as the power of evil. Why? My dear fellow, all qualities have their opposites, like love and hate, pleasure and pain, generosity and avarice. How could we recognize the goodness of Jesus Christ, Lao Tzu, Ashoka, Marcus Aurelius, Francis of Assisi, Florence Nightingale, and 1,000 others, if it were not for the evil lives of Herod, Caesar, Borgia, Rasputin, Landru, Ivan Kruger, and the rest? That's true, Rex admitted slowly. Then if an intensive cultivation of good can beget strange powers, is there any reason why an intensive cultivation of evil should not beget them also? I think I begin to get what you're driving at. Good. Now listen, Rex. The Duke leaned forward earnestly, and I will try and expound what little I know of the esoteric doctrine which has come down to us through ages. You have heard of the Persian myth of Ozamund and Ahriman, the eternal powers of light and darkness, said to be co-equal and warring without cessation for the good or ill of mankind. All ancient sun and nature worship, festivals of spring and so on, were only outward expression of that myth, for light typifies health and wisdom, growth and life, while darkness means disease and ignorance, decay and death.
Thanks, Ginny. Father Frank, maybe you would care to continue.
Oh, yes. In its highest sense, light symbolizes the growth of a spirit towards that perfection in which it can froth a body and become light itself. But the road to perfection is long and arduous. Too much to hope for in one short human life. Hence the widespread belief in reincarnation. That we were born again and again until we begin to despise the pleasures of flesh. This doctrine is so old that no man can trace its origin. Yes, yet it is the inner core of truth common to all religions at their inception. Consider the teaching of Jesus Christ with that in mind, and you will be amazed that you have not realized before the true purport of his message. Did not say that the kingdom of God was within you, and when he walked upon the waters declared, these things that I do, ye shall do also, and greater things than these shall ye do, for I go unto my Father which is in heaven. Meaning most certainly that he had achieved perfection, but that others had the same power within each one of them to do likewise. Richelieu paused for a moment and then went on more slowly. Unfortunately, the hours of a night are still equal to the hours of a day. And so the power of darkness is no less active than when the world was young, and no sooner does a fresh master appear to reveal the light than ignorance, greed, and lust for power cloud the minds of his followers. The message becomes distorted, and the simplicity of the truth submerged and forgotten in the pompous ceremonies and the meticulous performance of rituals which have lost their meaning. Yet the real truth is never entirely lost, and through the centuries new masters continue arising, either to proclaim it, or, if the time is not propitious, to pass it on in secret to the chosen few. Apollonius of Tyana learned it in the East. The so-called heretics, whom we know as the Albigenses, preached it in the 12th century throughout southern France until they were exterminated. Christian Rosenkreuz had it in the Middle Ages. It was the innermost secret of the Order of Templars, who were suppressed because of it by the Church of Rome. The alchemists, too, searched for and practiced it. Only the ignorant take literally their struggle to find the elixir of life. Behind such phrases designed to protect them from the persecution of their enemies, they sought eternal life. And their efforts to transmute base metals into gold were only symbolical of a transfusion of matter into life. And still today, while the nightlife of London goes on about us, there are mystics and adepts who are seeking the eightfold way to perfection in many corners of the earth. You really believe that? Asked Rex seriously. I do. Richelieu's answers held no trace of doubt. I give you my word, Rex, that I've talked with men whose sanity would never question, an Englishman, an Italian, and a Hindu, all three of whom have been taken by guides sent to fetch them to the hidden valley in the uplands of Tibet, where some of the lamas have reached such a high degree of enlightenment that they can prolong their lives at will and perform today all the miracles which you have read of in the Bible. It is there that the sacred fire of truth has been preserved for centuries, safe from the brutal mercenary folly of our modern world. That sounds a pretty tall story to me, but granted there are mystics who have achieved such amazing powers through their holiness, I still don't see where your black magic comes in. Let's not talk about black magic, which is associated with preposterous in our day, but the order of a left-hand path. That too has its adepts, and just as the Yoga of Tibet are the preservers of a way of light, the way of darkness is exemplified in the horrible voodoo cult, which had its origin in Madagascar and has held Africa in its grip for centuries, spreading even with the slave trade. Sorry, you shrunk.
Still,
I gotta go back now. Sorry, where was it now? To the slave trade to the West Indies and your own country. Yes, I know quite a piece about that. The Negroes monkey with it, black home in the southern states, despite their apparent Christianity. Still, I can't think that an educated man like Simon would take serious notice of a mumbo-jumbo stuff. Not in the crude form, perhaps, but others are cultivating the power of evil. And among wise, it is generally the wealthy and the intellectual who are avaricious for greater riches and power, to whom it appeals. In the Paris Louis XIV, long after the Middle Ages were forgotten, it was still particularly rampant. A poisoner, Levoisin, was proved to have procured over 1,500 children from the infamous Abbé Guibourg to sacrifice the black masses. He used to cut their throats, drain the blood into a chalice, and then pour it over the naked body of the inquirer who lay stretched upon the altar. I speak of actual history, Rex, and you can read the record of a trial that followed, in which 246 men and women were indicted of these hellish practices. Maybe it sounds ghastly enough, but that's a mighty long time ago. Then, if you need more modern evidence of its continuance hidden in our midst, there is the well-authenticated case of Prince Borghese. He left his Venetian palazzo on a long lease, expiring as late as 1895. The tenants had not realized that the lease had run out until he notified them of his intention to resume possession. They protested, but Borghese's agents forced an entry. What do you think they found? Lord knows, Rex shook his head. Then the principal salon had been redecorated at enormous cost and converted into a satanic temple. The walls were hung from ceiling to floor with heavy curtains of silk damask, scarlet and black to exclude the light. At the farther end there stretched a large tapestry upon which was woven a colossal figure of Lucifer dominating the whole. Beneath, an altar had been built and amply furnished with the whole liturgy of hell. Black candles, vessels, ritual, nothing was lacking. Cushion prie-dieus and luxurious chairs, crimson and gold, were set in order for the assistants, and the chamber lit with electricity fantastically arranged, so that it should glare through an enormous human eye. The Richelieu hammered the desk with his clenched fist. These are facts I'm giving you, Rex. Facts. You hear things I can prove by eyewitnesses still living. Despite our electricity, our airplanes, our modern skepticism, the power of darkness still living force, worshipped by depraved human beings for their unholy ends in the great cities of Europe and America to this very day. Rex's face has suddenly paled under its tan. Do you really think poor Simon had got mixed in this beastliness? I know it, man. Could you have been so intrigued with the girl that you didn't notice the rest of the foul crew? The albino, the man with the hair lip, the Eurasian who only possessed a left arm, They're devil worshippers, all of them. Not the girl, not Tannis, cried Rex, springing to his feet. She must have been drawn into it like Simon. Perhaps. But the final proof lay in the basket. They were about to practice the age-old sacrifice of an infernal master, as just as you would read the Negroes do. The slaughter of a black cock and a white hen. Yes, what is it? Richelieu swung round, and a soft knock came to the door. Excellency, his man Max stood bowing in the doorway. I thought I'd better bring you this. In his open palm, he displayed the jeweled swastika. With one panther-like spring, the Duke thrust inside and bounded from the room. Simon, he shouted, he dashed down the corridor. Simon, I command you to stay still. And when he reached the bedroom, the only sign that Simon had ever occupied was a tumbled bed, and his underclothes left scattered on the floor.
Thank you so much, Father Frank. I mean, we're approaching 7 o'clock. I think it might be a good.
Is it 8 o'clock in England, isn't it? Still?
I'm getting, yeah.
9 o'clock in Holland.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be. I think we.
Yeah, so good. I think that's a good point to wow. I mean, that's just such a childhood memory for me. And can't you see why the school had to ban it on several accounts?
Yeah. I think it would be good to hear our views of first the writing is the prose of good quality. I mean, has he wound us up to a sort of pitch of expectation? Hugh, do you have a finger raised, please?
I do think that Dennis Wheatley is entirely serious in his exploration of the content of all of this. But if you follow the metaphorization of it through, I think virtually all of the metaphors, and indeed situational accounts that are quasi-metaphorical, are cliche. The piercing eyes, leaping like a tiger, and those kind of things.
But by cliche, I mean they're not original, and
there's
worn.
There's not the kind of charge that you would find in The Ancient Mariner or The Purloined Letter by Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, I'd have to go through them in detail to make my case, but they're very sincerely contrived, but they are contrived and profoundly lacking in originality. So in terms of his writing, there's something, I believe, very stereotypical about it. I think the characterization is pretty stereotypical.
Yeah.
And the situations are pretty stereotypical. I mean, it draws one in, and it's got the power of cliche, but so does a newspaper article, of course.
I don't think anyone would claim that Dennis Wheatley was the W.B. Yeats, but he's
No, but there's something in between.
quite well. Yeah.
I read a lot of Isaac Asimov, and Isaac Asimov is not Charles Dickens. But there is an original mind in Isaac Asimov. I think that Dennis Wheatley is very good at what he does, but I don't think he's in that in-between space between the popular writer who essentially is drawing on cliche and the great writer like Joseph Conrad or Marcel Proust, who is portraying an original vision. Whereas I think that Isaac Asimov or Robert Heinlein are in the in-between space between those two things. And thinking out what is going on in Asimov, you realize that there's a very powerful original analysis, which is very highly relevant to the onslaught of AI at the present time.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. Janine, what's your thought? A writer and someone new to the world of Dennis Wheatley.
I think he writes in a pedestrian way, but by doing so, the story moves very quickly. If the more original the metaphors and the allusions to other things, the more difficult it is for the average reader to digest what is going on if you don't know about Ozymandias. Okay, an ordinary reader would say, oh, I gotta look that up. What does that mean? And that would interrupt the flow of the story. So whereas I do agree with you, Haywood, I think a lot of his stuff is pretty cliched. On the other hand, Michael says he read it when he was a young boy, or a teenager, preteen.
Well, not pre-teenager, actually. I think I was 11. Yeah.
11, right. And I think for that age group, I don't think they're thinking in terms of literary analysis or criticism. They're just reading it for the story. And
Agreed. I was the same.
It moves very quickly through the story, which is unusual given the long passages of description, which I'm not a real big fan of that, but I understand that this is the writer's style. As far as the actual story goes, I think it's pretty good in terms of explaining for younger people very complex philosophic ideas about good and evil, and bring in the foreign influences to show that Christianity is not the only one-all and be-all of belief systems. Not to go to moral relativism, I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about including other cultural beliefs that younger people may not be acquainted with. And that I think he does very well. It gets a little bit convoluted, but the ability of a writer to take complex ideas and bring them down to a street level where people can understand and get through it easily, I think is pretty good.
He does give a philosophical justification for the narrative, which I think is good. That gives it some sort of legitimation. Michael, Michael in France. How was your thought? Because I mean, you're familiar with witchcraft and so forth, so you're also you have.
He's familiar with witchcraft. That's a rather. Would you like to?
Michael, are you a wizard?
I wouldn't put it that way. I agree with what's been said about the writing style. I found it a little bit cumbersome. He does build up a suspense, but it's laborious, and so I found it a little bit tiring. I was surprised about that, and the teaching things that he's tried to get across. I mean, it's this kind of old black and white Zarathustrianism. It's in itself almost is a cliche, and he's kind of exalting the perennial philosophy of Huxley or whomever, and I don't know. I mean, I could see him using his writing as a vehicle to get these ideas across, but I don't find the ideas, at least at this point in time. Maybe when Michael read it when he was 11, it was different, but these ideas are too well known, I think, and to hear someone expound on it all laboriously like that, it didn't really grab me.
Well, you're familiar with, you have a mind that's well traveled, so you're not going to be too impressed, I think. But Father Frank, I mean, you also have a very particular perspective on this. I mean, how did you find it? Was it a good read? Did you find too weighed down by cliches?
Well, I suppose one positive comment to be made from my point of view is certainly I would like to read the whole book. So in that sense, it is, but similarly, I couldn't put down the first Harry Potter book. That doesn't mean that I consider Harry Potter, a remarkable work of literature. And as far as the style is concerned, the French have this expression: "Style is the man, the style c'est l'homme." So the style, in a way, reflects the kind of guy Wheatley was. Someone spoke about books which are for the semi-educated. I suppose, in a sense, he was writing for the semi-educated. People who might actually believe, I love a trope when he speaks about the lamas of Tibet having these special powers. That goes back to Madame Blavatsky, well-known imposter and fraud, who wrote about the Secret Masters. But having said all that, I mean, there are many accounts which one can give of negative forces, realities. I don't want to use a grand metaphysical language, good and evil, so easy to make. That many people, assume it and, very often relate to it. But again, I would like to read the rest of the book.
I enjoyed the period colour, the quite rich and ripe descriptions of the people, which wouldn't be done nowadays, and the world that they inhabit, playing bridge and so forth. It's sort of part Bertie Wooster, part Bulldog Drummond, and part
certain Somerset Maugham, maybe.
Arabours, Huysmans, that kind of.
But also Somerset Maugham wrote the novel The Magician, which was inspired by Aleister Crowley. And in the novel, Somerset Maugham credits Crowley with real magical powers, while he actually, in the introduction of the book, he says the actual historical Aleister Crowley in the book is called Oliver Haddo. That is based on Aleister Crowley, but in the introduction of the book, Maugham says, in his opinion, Maugham actually met Crowley in Paris. In his opinion, Crowley had no magical power, whatever they could be, might be.
Well, that might interest you, Father Frank, that in this book,
I can't see it.
Oh,
The Devil,
To the Devil a Daughter, by Dennis Wheatley. That subject is raised about Aleister Crowley, and one of the characters asked, but you met him in Paris and he was ineffective. And the reason given is that Aleister Crowley in this account had lost all his powers after a horrific encounter with Pan, who he's conjured up in a ceremony. And I think something like that. Anyway, it's certainly, I think that Dennis Wheatley probably knew Somerset Maugham, almost certainly, actually. So yeah, I agree with everything. My feeling is very much that, well, I agree with everybody really, except that I would defend to a certain extent people who do write potboilers like this. I think it is very much right. Janine is absolutely spot on that it's something for a young person, and it's just a shame that young people don't read anymore, because I think it's an excellent book for an 11 or 12-year-old. It's just the right age, but people don't read anymore, so that's very sad. But yeah, he is, of course, full of cliches, and one of his worst cliches is that you'll notice it the more you read. Americans have really so much American slang, and there's a Welshman in the car of Gifford Hillary who comes out with all these Welsh expressions. It's just vaudeville,
Yeah.
So one extra element is, I think there's an element of escapism, this luxury, this particularly a lot of his books came out after the war, where the Labour government had imposed, really talk about austerity.
It's late
according to my mother.
Gothic, isn't it, Michael?
Well, it's this Gothic nostalgia and also this wealth, I think. Yeah, I thought one thing was very funny, really made me laugh, is that those days, Notting Hill, it was beyond Mayfair and there was absolute pits. And of course, anybody today who owns a house in Notting Hill, you're going to go, ooh, wow, he's very moneyed. Just an amusing side remark. Yeah.
What one linguistic point? There was a statement. I think the first, on the first page that people that they travelled many thousand verts. Did anyone? Janine, you were reading that, and I think you hesitated over it because like me, it perhaps wasn't a word that you were familiar with. Does anyone?
Yeah, I think it's a Russian equivalent of whatever it is. Yeah, sure. I always thought it was called a verst. I think he calls it a vert or something.
Yeah, that's a Russian term.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. It's in Dostoevsky and everything. Yeah.
Term for a league.
I don't quite know how far it is. No.
But it's okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Actually a variant of another word that will perhaps be more easy to find, because I couldn't find anything that really made sense in
I always thought it was a verst, V-E-R-S-T, but I'm not sure.
yeah,
It's a Russian term.
Yeah.
Because a vert, vert, I mean it
could be a misprint. There was another misprint there somewhere.
That's not a misprint. That's how it's spelled.
Is it? It's V-E-R-T, is it?
The E-R-T vert, which relates to the colour green and seem to relate to an ancient right to hunt on somewhere. But yeah, I think your explanation is correct, Michael, that it's a misprint.
A misprint for verst, yeah. It could be.
I don't believe it's a misprint. I think it's a Russian unit of distance.
I was going to say that.
Yes, but isn't it? Well, we could quickly check.
I've never seen it in any book spelt in any other way. E-R-S-T.
Yeah, ST, exactly.
Of course, as a synonym of green is another matter.
I've got verst here. Versta is an obsolete Russian unit of length defined as 500 satsen. Okay, doesn't help. That makes a verst equal to 1.06 kilometers, 3,500 feet.
But Hugh, with that spelling, are you say?
If you go to English translations of Dostoevsky, you'll find it spelt in the same way, V-E-R-S-T.
Yeah.
That it's not connected, it's not a misprint for anything to do with the French or Latin understanding of green.
Oh, that's good. Well, we sorted that out. Yeah, some of the translations from the Russian, obviously the representation.
Well, that's part of the thrill if you've got an inquisitive mind and you're very young, as he throws in these exciting things like, Russian words, there are Latin words, there are Greek quotations, and which I do respect. He does try to use real streets, real places. And I don't know why other writers, for example, Agatha Christie, immediately there's a place in London, it doesn't exist. Whereas nearly always Dennis Wheatley, if you check, these are real places. Somebody, in the Satanists, the person has his rooms in Warwick Square, which certainly exists because that's where I used to live. And but, you can check, and I like that. I personally like that very much.
Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes stories, as well as in Chesterton in Father Brown stories, also uses a lot of real topography of London.
Yes, I don't know why some writers don't, because whatever. Yeah.
So I wanted to say very briefly that going back for a moment to Aleister Crowley, I was when I lived in Rome, I was asked by Julius Evola to deliver a message from someone in a place called Cefalù, which is in Sicily. It's a lovely seaside town, to a person, to a particular address. And I went to the young friend of mine, and we had some very strange experiences there. I mean, at some stage his boy disappeared, and then he told me that he'd been taught sexual magic of the kind of which Crowley commended and everything else. And later on, this boy came to a terrible end. He was murdered. But I talk of this in my latest book on Dajjal. But leaving on one side, so the fact that, you know, these, I don't know if you can talk of evil influence, but Crowley, was he an imposter, or did he actually, I mean, in a sense, you know, so things maybe merely psychological or be subconscious, but at the same time, they can become operational.
Yeah. Heward, you had your hand up.
There's an interesting thing which comes out if you have the modern Kindle version, which was transmitted through Wheatley's family, and has an introduction by his grandson.
Oh, right.
It's noted that there's been some minor alterations that the family have done. Well, those minor alterations are designed to minimize any racial element in the writing. So in the first introduction of Simon, in the Kindle version, the online version, the reference to Simon as a Jew is removed, and he's just called a young man. And that happens at several times. Although when they're talking about the swastika, obviously the whole passage would make no sense if it didn't refer to his Jewishness. So they're inconsistent there. And there's another point where there's a strong reference to Christianity, which is deleted as it were. It all seems as if it might have been designed by a disciple of Richard Dawkins. And even to the point that the reference to Kidderminster in the first couple of pages, there's no place name in the Kindle version. So there's a strange kind of political correctness coming in due to our enlightened egalitarianism of the present time.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
That is.
I give a very actually entertaining example of such bowdlerization with Biggles by W.E. Johns.
I'll bet.
Yeah, but it's happened twice, Heward. This is what's really funny. A lot of people don't know that it was censored in the 1950s when I read it. And I was very surprised that Biggles drank so much lemonade. Biggles can come in and say, God, Ginger, I'm dying of thirst. Give me a lemonade. And he knocks back the lemonade. And of course, it was originally whiskey. And it was considered in the 1950s inappropriate for children that their hero should be drinking so much whiskey. So whiskey was replaced everywhere with lemonade. They re-edited Biggles at the end of the 1980s and the 90s. And would you believe it? The whiskey came back. But all the references to the Japanese as beastly yellow slit-eyed dwarves and monkeys, and the Germans, even the Germans, the bad references are removed, and the references to Jews, and everything's all out. It's really funny. And another one is Billy Bunter, who references to his fatness are removed, and he's not caned at the end. So when Squelch says, bend over Bunter, I mean, that is the classic end of every Bunter novel, isn't it? It is pathetically, apparently, I've only read the original versions, Bunter 400 lines, which is just not the same, is it? And then Bunter goes, ooh. But then, of course, in the original, it's bend over Bunter and the cane comes down and then Bunter goes, wow. And that's usually the end of the story. Anyway, so it's all the time now. Everything's being changed, centered. And
I wouldn't be surprised if they tampered with John Buchan.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a whole lot, I would imagine. Yeah.
Well,
As we were
God
reading
forbid
the story,
they start on Joseph Conrad.
about the references to the Negroes. and the description of Mata.
Mokata.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I was thinking to myself, they couldn't print this today.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
story, as we're reading it, would not be published in America today,
yeah, no,
with all its references to race and descriptions, and someone
Yeah.
having hair lip and being ugly, and yeah, you just
Yeah.
can't-
it's kind of always has a shock value today, isn't it? When
Yeah,
I read it at 11, none of that came across to me at all. Yeah.
The rather almost kind of unkind way that he likes to describe people's slight imperfection just seems quite universal. Everyone gets that treatment, whether someone's got a nose, this, that,
But
and the
actually,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Ian Fleming, who is much more modern and I would say a better quality of writer, also all his enemies have some physical imperfection.
yeah,
Something which is not physically right with them, which is an effective way, it's a conventional cliche way, an effective way to convey difference, alienness, evil, if you like. They all, Dr. No in a book
Very true,
has,
very true.
has no hands. There is somebody else who is immensely fat. So they're all physically odd.
It's a very good point. Actually, I think there's a certain similarity maybe between Ian Fleming and Dennis Wheatley as well. Probably in their views, in their activities. They were both
I think,
associated with.
in my opinion, Ian, he was a better writer.
Interesting you say that. I found very few people actually, I think, read Ian Fleming, don't they? They all see the films, but I did read one of them, Goldfinger, I think, is it that? And I thought that golf match just goes on, and it's just because he's interested in golf. And I think there's a certain point that a writer should really stop. I mean, it was just but yeah, anyway.
Ian Fleming has got a more concise way of narrating a story. Is that? Oh, okay, Hugh. All right, thanks. Yeah, I think we're finishing quite soon, but very much appreciate your presence and your opinion.
Can I just give a quick message to Gian? I'll be in touch.
Okay.
About agents.
Not secret ones, I heard.
Oh, of course.
Of course.
Good. By the way, you were the person who talked about the story, Mr. Smith and the Pharaoh. Remember? And I believe it was you that said that you didn't like the ending of it.
Yeah. You said it was. Yeah. You warned us that it was not
right. And when we read it, I want you to know I agreed with you.
This is very good.
Yes, I did. I did. I was one of the few and the brave to say you were absolutely right on that.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Goodbye. Yeah.
See you soon.
No.
Have we anything more to say about Dennis? Yeah, perhaps I would just stress that one point which Father Frank mentioned. In his other novels as well, of course, they're not all black magic. His ability to keep you going and wanting to know what happens next, that he's perhaps a very good writer for being delayed at an airport for 6 hours or something. Whereas if the writer is a little bit better or more profound, and your thoughts, you have to sort of glide along with your thoughts, and you need a writer like that. And I would think he's excellent even for adults for that kind of situation. But as I say, I think more from reading it again, I would say it's a young person's book.
And the actual subject, the occult, demonic possession, powers of darkness, is a flourishing subject in terms of fiction, films, and so on. Think about, of course, The Exorcist movie, which generated a sequel. And there are constantly films in which,
absolutely, yes.
It's something which appeals to people from a point, some people. It is not a very sophisticated, once again, subject. I found, for example, those references to, I mean, miracles and so on. You know, there's sorts of explanations which can give, you know, or what are generally called miracles. Many of the explanations are not, you know, do not invoke the supernatural at all. And but I mean, you know, the popular mind is not, you know, they're not philosophers. They are people who are drawn to very simple ideas and contrasts and dualities.
I would like to put in one point, as you mentioned that the succeeding and current generations of black magic, I don't know if you've ever read any of the books, they are truly trash. I wouldn't never insult Dennis Wheatley by comparing him to them. I've read some of them, they're disgusting, they're sadistic, they're pornographic in the worst possible sense of the word, and there's a market of them. I mean, they seem to absolutely fascinate people, both in videos and in terms of books. And it was, if you like, that Dennis Wheatley is the last generation of halfway intelligent and gentlemanly approach to black magic, which
I did find it surprising. His
Also,
description
that
of the sacrifice, though. And
he does, yeah, he does mention those things.
over
He
the
does, yeah.
first
It's not
unfold.
just fun and games. And I must have read that as a child and not even particularly noticed, or maybe I did and it had some terrible effect on me. Who knows?
But I was surprised to be reading that
Yeah,
and have that scene put in there. And I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty heavy for 11, 12-year-old. I wouldn't want my child, I don't think at 11 to read something like, of course, I realize you're male, which is completely different. My son would read all kinds of things that would make my hair stand on end now. But anyway, but you're right. When you think of movies like Saw 1 through 5 about dismembering people and that sort of thing, it almost normalizes what Wheatley would refer to as evil. And
yes,
I find that interesting.
very good point. Yeah, yeah.
Who's seen the film of this? I think I probably did, but it rings a bell in my.
Was it a film with Christopher Lee? And
Or
was that? Yeah, I think it's yeah. In which case, it wasn't very good. But I think I did see it.
Hammer.
It was a Hammer film. I think it was with Christopher Lee, wasn't it? I'm not sure.
No, Christopher Lee was a considerable man.
No,
yeah,
absolutely. I remember Christopher Lee when he died. My son was about 8, I think, and came into the room and he just said, "Papa, Count Dooku is told."
Yeah.
And I thought, from Star Wars, and I just thought Christopher Lee is about the only actor who spans 3 generations. He really spans 3 generations. My mother was familiar with him. I was familiar with him, and he managed, because of Star Wars and of course Lord of the Rings, managed to make an impression on my 2 children. They absolutely know who Christopher Lee was.
I actually met briefly Christopher Lee once when I was a student, and I was working in Harrods book department, and I was serving on the till, and Christopher Lee came up, and he had a number of books which he was buying, and they were all books concerning with crimes and horror stories. So he kind of struck it that he was obviously a gentleman.
Well, yeah, I can tell you an anecdote as well. My mother met Christopher Lee at a cocktail party, and he invited her to his flat, and she found him extremely sinister. Declined the invitation.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's, I mean, because if she'd accepted, maybe you would have him as your father or something.
Well,
Who
then
knows?
it wouldn't be me, would it? Wouldn't be me. Yeah.
Michael, did you ever? I know you've rubbed shoulders with various theatrical personages. Not Christopher.
Not Christopher Lee. No.
Oh, okay. Are you a fan of the horror genre with Peter Cushing and so forth?
The one is good, yeah, yeah.
Michael?
I would think not. Yeah, I would say not.
Okay, okay. Oh well,
Yeah,
well,
okay, that was very good. By the way, Steph, there is a little bit of a problem with your microphone, so it might be something to consider for the future. I mean, I think we could hear you, but what happens is occasionally a word is cut out. I don't know
Yeah,
what that is technically.
okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Almost like you go up and then you go back, and then you go up and then you go back.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Oh, yeah, there's something to.
Okay, so we need to consider something for next month. I don't know if anybody,
Are
perhaps
we
this
not gonna
reading of writers is particularly attractive. It seems to me to be a very good way of introducing a writer, is actually to read from that writer. So
Yeah,
Are
it's
we not going to finish this book? Are we? Do I
ah,
have
you
to
see,
go
it's what
out?
we said about Dennis Wheatley. There you go. What's the absolute proof? You're disappointed that we're not going to finish the book. It would be a bit long.
Well, I was disappointed. I said, "Are we going to?"
No, but you said it with a great sort of look
Yeah,
of expect.
Yeah,
Because
I'll look
he
it up
has
and
that
read the rest
talent,
of it.
doesn't he? He
Yeah.
has that ability. There's no question of it. I think he's a master of getting people to want to know what happened, even if they don't think, oh, this writer isn't so good, but I do want to know what's going to happen.
yeah.
Does the devil ride out?
you know, I'll send you the yeah, file. You can find.
Ah, she'll get hooked. Then it's to the devil, a daughter, the car of Guildford, Hilary, the Satanist. They use dark forces. They use dark forces as even I thought it was quite funny. I read that when I was a bit older, that scene with Hitler, because that is sort of funny.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Hitler.
yeah, there's a great scene with Hitler in the bunker and the used dark forces. And the funny thing about it, which is quite a funny situation, is the interpretation is that Hitler is a tool of Satan, that he's got a bit out of control. So Satan's persuaded to link up with the forces of light to destroy Satan, because to destroy Hitler, because his creature has got a bit too out of control and is sort of competing with him, which is a kind of funny. I mean, I thought at 13 that was quite funny, and I still do. But there's a very good scene in the bunkers, and I think Trevor Roper borrowed that from Dennis Wheatley, but it might be the other way around.
But quite apart from the kind of jocular, pathetic interpretation, scholars like Goodrich Clark, who is now departed, but he was a well-known Cambridge scholar. He wrote The Occult Roots of Nazism, showing, I read a long time ago, showing some strands of the National Socialist Party's members which had those interests. But I think, in my opinion, they've been exaggerated, overacted, because obviously they lend themselves to be into exaggeration. And there was, I've read Hitler's Table Talks, which actually a very fine read, much more interesting than Mein Kampf in a way. And I find in the Table Talks there is no absolutely sympathy for anything. Actually, in a way, Hitler comes across as an old-fashioned Enlightenment rationalist. An enemy of revealed religion, and in favor of reason, and obviously interpreted his own way, but nothing indicating interest in spiritualism, the occult, or the supernatural, nothing of that at all. He only scoffs at that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right. On that note.
I don't know if there's any writer anybody would particularly like to.
Well, straight off, I can't think of anybody, but I can let you know if I can think of anyone.
Okay, I was still maybe of some short story writer who perhaps is a bit neglected, like Catherine Mansfield or someone like that. Might be an idea. We'll think about it. Stead and I will think about something.
I think this evening is this evening is true that are you able to hear me? Yeah.
Yes, but it's a bit scratchy.
Yeah.
Okay, bye, Michael.
So let's all go. All right. Yeah, very good to see you, Michael, and let's wish everyone a happy Sunday. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, you were saying, Stead, it was a bit scratchy, but I can follow you, I think.
Yeah, I think we proved that it's quite good just to pick a book and we can read it. That's fine, and that's simple, and that's a good thing. And if there's sufficient power in the book, then people will finish it independently. So that's good.
That's true as well, actually. Yes.
It's interesting, but in the past, I often consider the methodology of having a session by Sentinel reading a book. Initially, my reaction was negative. I thought it was plodding and tedious, but in fact, in reality, the reality has to some extent disproven me, because obviously I found myself drawn in, even if I found the style somewhat pompous and dated. But the story drew me in, and I would like to, I'm not dying to, but if I get a chance of getting a novel, to read it up.
Well, there you go. There you go.
That should be the purpose, one of them, of our little circle, just to keep our desire to read alive. And I think so.
Absolutely. Bravo to that. That is exactly the
Oh,
point.
then I think I need. I think we've.
Yeah, that's a good time to. Thanks very much to everyone for coming.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Ed. Take care.
Bye.
And hopefully see you all next month.
Yeah. Au revoir. Bye bye.
À la prochaine.